Hi everyone, we're going back to the future. Actually, we're going back to the past, like family therapy makes you do. You see how that goes? Oh, you see how I do that? Yes! We're going back to the past. And it's okay. Now let's get this video started. Welcome. My name is Araceli, aka Chelly, and today on Chelly's Mental Wealth, we're going to be discussing family therapy. Family therapy, why it's so important. Why is it so important? Oh, it's super important. Family therapy, honestly, is just another form of couples therapy. Couples therapy is two people, but with family therapy, it's the whole family dynamics. I mean, obviously, depending on which family member is willing to go to the family session, it's almost the same concept. The reason why I wanted to talk about family therapy is because family therapy is not really talked about as much, and I don't think it's as common, and I completely understand why. Because, I mean, just imagine having to not only try to handle one personality, but try to handle a handful of personalities, especially if there's a lot of like high energies, even just low energies, with just like so many dynamics. It could be sometimes difficult and scary for a professional to even think like, can I even do this? Can I? And hopefully, you've encountered a professional, or hopefully you will encounter a professional that is aware of family therapy and how it can tremendously help with family dynamics, and also help with the process of healing and just learning how to let go of just past traumas, and learning how to process in them, learning how to communicate, learning how to just find that medium to finally, feel better and not feel like depressed or anxious or whatever mental barriers the person's feeling. Family therapy is perfect so that you can finally have that safe space to have that conversation with the person that you probably feel like you can't in a normal setting. So you have to think about it like in a family session, once you've already built rapport with your therapist, hopefully the therapist will feel comfortable enough to bring a family member into the session, or bring a handful of family members into the session if it's part of your treatment process, if it's part of your healing process, if it's something that the therapist and that is going to help you with healing. Like I can't stress it enough. It's all about like figuring out what is it that's hindering you from moving forward, or what is it that's hindering your ability to just continue to have like a healthier routine life, or doing the things that you used to love. Because a lot of the times when we're going through some things, we stay away from things that we used to love because we're sadder and we're anxious. And once we figure out what's going on, and sometimes it's usually family dynamics. That's what I always kept encountering over and over and over in my personal experience. And the fact that I still live with my parents, and I see the dynamics, and then I see my own dynamics, and then I'm outside in the community, I see dynamics, and then in my work experience I see dynamics, and I'm just like really observant and just collecting data and realizing the same patterns that we as humans tend to have that hinders us from moving forward or to have better, healthier relationships. And it always starts in the home setting. That's why I always say that, like, if we can have not normal, I don't want to say normal because normal could be different for everybody. But if you if you're unable to problem solve inside your home setting, and you didn't learn those skills in your home setting, or the way you communicated with the people that you've dealt with most of your life because you lived in the home, it's gonna be really hard for you to learn how to communicate outside, unless you were able to recognize like, oh, okay, I didn't really like the way we communicated when we were this age. I want to do something different because it's not working for me anymore. But sometimes we don't realize that the communication style is not working because everybody's doing it the same way, so we think that it's okay. Which I understand that too, because I'm telling you, I've been in that situation as well, when you're kind of used to communicating a certain way, and then it's like you think it's normal. Well, I don't want to say normal, but you think that it's healthy, and it's not really healthy. It doesn't really like problem solve, or it doesn't really validate people. It's just, the thing is that like we as family members, or just like when we're in dynamics, we have to learn how to communicate, how to problem solve, and how to validate. Those are the three things that I keep like encountering over and over and over, that if we don't learn how to do that, it's going to be so hard for us to have just ways to resolve conflict. So when you bring in the family member, you're going to be able to learn how to resolve conflict. And even though because this is a possibility. Even though you might go to a family session and you might not get the response that you want, it's still a very good exposure exercise and a really good way of just, it's still healing. Because yeah, you didn't get to hear what you wanted, but you said what you said. You finally let it out. And sometimes we just have to let it out. Sometimes we let it out and then we don't get the response that we want outside of therapy. But sometimes when we go back into therapy and we bring them in, we might get, you'll have the professional to kind of break down the response and kind of help you process, well, why do you feel that way, the way they responded this way? Can you express that to your family member? And that way it's like they're already teaching you how to communicate, how to be like, okay, and hopefully this allows that family member to be quiet and actually listen. Because that's the problem that we tend to have a lot with just communicating, is depending on how you were raised, we're not really raised to like actively listen. Depending on certain cultures, I don't know, and I'm only speaking for my culture, but I know that we're not really taught to validate people's feelings. So validation is something that we don't realize that we're lacking a lot in our home setting. Like if we don't get validated by our parents while we're growing up, if we don't feel accepted by our parents or caregivers while we're growing up, then we're gonna feel very insecure when we're outside of the world, because we don't have a safe space. It's all about feeling safe. So if you're not feeling safe at home while you're growing up, if you don't feel supported, you don't feel like, you don't feel like you got your peeps, when you're out in the real world, you're gonna feel like it's you against the world as well, because you're used to that dynamics inside the home setting, so you're taking it out in the community. That's what sometimes some youth that are at risk, that are in really bad home dynamics, tend to go to gang affiliation or just a really bad crowd, because they're just trying to find a spot where they feel safe, even though obviously it's not safe doing gang affiliated activities, but they still feel supported by that group. They feel like they belong, so they're gonna be more inclined to keep going to that group. So that's why it's important to fix the family dynamics as much as a person can, or they can allow it, because it'll help with not looking at elsewhere in other communities or in other parts of groups that are not healthy, basically. So family dynamics, I realized that, like, if even for me, personal experience, like living in with my parents, it helped me recognize, wow, this is what's hurting me, or this is what's happening to me. So okay, so now I have to communicate. So I've learned to communicate with my parents. I've learned to communicate better with my siblings. I've learned to communicate better with my son. But the thing is that it took a lot. It took a lot of time and effort and practice, and it was a lot of being exposed in the field and realizing over and over and over that, like, in order for, at least for me, in order for me to move on, I have to problem solve, but I also need the validation. Like, I need to get validated. And in therapy, that's, hopefully they can teach you that, like, they teach you guys techniques in order for you to communicate better. That's why I love family therapy. In my position, the only thing that I can really do is teach techniques and practice and role play with the family over like little medium issues, but not big nitty gritty traumatic issues, because I don't know how, I don't know how to control the setting. I don't know how to be like, well, stop, let them talk. How do you feel? What do you think? All that stuff, because it's important. We're not used to doing that. We're not used to kind of like, okay, so what do you think? What do you think? I care about your feelings. A lot of the times we're so worried about us and only us and our feelings that we don't care about the other person, especially when we're butthurt, depending on the person, because there's some people where it's like they're hurting, but they're also hurting for the other person. And then it's like even more of a double whammy. But then there's people out there that are so defensive and they're hurting, that no matter what, they're always going to be defensive. So that's why it depends. Now, I'm going to talk about a specific technique that I learned while doing couples therapy that I try to teach people that want to learn in the field. And this is a method that you can also ask your clinician, therapist, professional to work with you on this. Maybe you can practice with a professional so that you can hopefully practice in the home setting on your own, or hopefully bring in a family member later on during the process once you're ready, and practice it. So this technique is called the floor, okay? The floor. So the floor, what this means is whenever the person has the floor, they are allowed to talk about why they got butthurt. So they have to use I statements like I feel, and then you kind of explain, so you're explaining, this person has the floor. They're explaining, and I'm gonna give you an example. I have the floor right now, okay?
You know what? You hurt my feelings because I feel like you don't care when you don't pick up your clothes from the floor.
And then the person who's listening to me needs to really listen to me and rephrase it back to me. So it's like they're summarizing it. And that way I know that they're hearing me. Because a lot of the times we just want to know that we're being heard, because we're talking over each other sometimes, right? Some people talk over each other. Some people are saying it and then you don't feel like they understood what you said. So that's why it's important for that person who has the floor next, that they're going to summarize it back to them. Like,
oh, so you're saying that you're sad because I didn't pick up the clothes from the floor and you thought that it's because I didn't care, or
that I was being mean?
And then I'm like,
Yeah, that's what I felt like.
does that mean that what I was saying is true for that person that just repeated it back to me? No. They're just repeating it back to me so that I feel like I'm being heard. That doesn't mean that they agree. So that's the main thing that I want people to focus on, is that just because a person is explaining, oh, you did this, or I felt like you did that, don't use the you statements. I feel like you did this. You have to let them express their feelings. And yes, feelings are not facts, but you have to let the person express their feelings, because their feelings are feelings and that's how they feel, and you can't change that person's feelings. You just can't. That's something I've learned over and over and over. You cannot change people's feelings and how they felt over the situation. Everybody has their perception about a situation that they've gone through. So they're just explaining their feelings, and you're being nice enough and summarizing it back to them so that they feel like, okay, you understand what I was saying. Okay, doesn't mean you agree, but you understand what I was saying. Like, you get it. You get why I was butthurt. I'm like, yeah, I understand why you got butthurt. But does it mean that they agree? They may not agree. They may, and the reason by saying they may not agree is because they might feel like, well, I wouldn't be butthurt over something like that, you know? And because that's how they feel. And you can't change that person for feeling that way too. So you have to think about it that way. So once the person summarizes it, then it's their turn to have the floor. And then the person who just expressed the way they feel, now they have to listen. And they have to summarize it back to them. The same technique, and they have to really listen and say it back so that they feel like they're being heard. And that technique works wonders, especially with people where they're having trouble with communicating. And the thing is that, like, you have to remember, we're not used to actually listening. A lot of us tend to just, like, when we're arguing with somebody or we want to get our point across and they're talking, or we're just thinking like,
Oh, I already know what I'm gonna say.
and you're not even hearing what the person is saying. So it's like you guys are gonna keep going back and forth because you didn't hear about what they said. You're just practicing and replaying in your head what you're gonna say and what you're gonna say it better. And so you're just gonna keep going and going and going. So break the cycle. So this way, it's like you're training your brain to be like, okay, I have to listen. I have to listen really hard, even though I don't want to. I'm gonna ask you to repeat it again. But it's a way for you to train your mind to be more attentive and practice actively listening to someone. And then eventually you're going to start to learn how to problem solve. And then problem solving is a whole nother technique where you have to learn. And the reality is, with this whole floor thing, before I jumped into the whole problem solving stuff, is, like I said before, if someone feels a certain way about a situation, whether it's in the past, whether it was had to do with their childhood, teenage experience, or their adulthood, whatever their experience was and how they feel, it's their right to feel that way. You can't change that person's feeling or perception over the way they took that situation. You can't. And then, because you can't expect that person to change that about you too. Like, if your experience was completely different than the other person, then that's your experience, and that's fine. Like, no one's gonna take away your experience, but people have to empathize towards each other's experience. And the story that I always bring up all the time is that story where, you know, a classmate shared where his parent used to hit her and her siblings, and she was fine with it, but her sister really took it to heart, and it took her a long time to forgive her dad, and that was her experience, and she deserved to get validated. You see, the classmate that I had, it didn't really bother her, so she didn't need validation, and that's okay too. We just have to recognize that some people need that validation because of their experience was completely different. And what does it cost to validate? I think some of us have a really hard time validating because of our ego. I think because we don't want to, we think that I think it has to do with ego, because we think that they're winning by agreeing, when we're not really agreeing. We're just validating someone's feelings, and we're acknowledging, like, oh, okay, oh, it hurt your feelings, all right, like it wouldn't hurt my feelings, but I get why I guess it hurt your feelings, you know, like it must suck. You know, you're validating it for them. And that goes a long way. Sometimes people just want to feel like everything's going to be okay. It sucks, but everything's going to be okay. And sometimes we're not trained to do that. Some people are. Lucky, you know, they're really, really lucky. For those people that know how to really just like think logically and problem solve. I think that people who are logical are able to problem solve a lot faster. But then also too, when you're too logical and you don't really feel, you're kind of like blunt. Because you don't really empathize towards people's feelings. So you kind of have to find a medium. You have to find a medium where like you're a feeler and you're logical. And it just, it works amazingly. So family therapy, I really encourage people to really look into family therapy. Family therapy is a very tough thing to do for a professional. So really just be mindful that you tell the professional that that's something that you would like in the future, that that's something you want to work towards, and hopefully they're honest with you about like their experience and if they've done it before or if they feel comfortable or if not. Because like I said, if it's a group of people that you're trying to bring into your session, the person really has to be secure and confident enough that they're going to be able to de-escalate. And if they can't de-escalate something, like if it, you know, escalates to a point where people might be like unsafe, then usually they go through the same procedure where, you know, they call the pet team or they call the police and all that stuff. And so hopefully they know that they can do that, but for some people it's scary that they don't even want to get to that point. So be honest with the therapist. And also too, if you feel like they're not really doing what you feel like they're doing, it's okay for you to switch it up. It's okay for you to say, you know, that this is not working. It's a really great exposure exercise for the person to teach themselves how to be assertive and be like, okay, this is professional, it's not working for me, and it's okay. So I'm just gonna ask he or she to refer me to another professional that might specialize or might do a better job, or they've had experience doing interventions and family therapy sessions. Because there is some people are really, really good at family sessions because that's what they like. Some people like to really just focus on certain areas. So if you can find someone that really specializes in like family therapy, great. Because I'm telling you, they're going to teach you so many different techniques in order for you to help problem solve, validate, and also just kind of process certain responses, because sometimes you're not going to get a response that you want. And we have to learn how to cope with those responses. But as long as we just, because for us, sometimes we just have to just let it all out. You know, maybe we need to let it out in a safe space where we know we're safe. And sometimes the therapy session is going to be a safe space for certain people. So even though you might not get the response that you want from your family member, it's still going to be a good process and good situation for you that you're able to kind of let things off of your chest. And from my experience, I also noticed that a lot of the times when you bring up family therapy, a lot of people get defensive over it because they don't want to seem weak, and then also the labeling kind of seems a little like scary. So I would just encourage anyone to talk to the person that you're trying to bring into family therapy and remind them that labels are just there to kind of have an insight as to what direction you should take to implement interventions and coping skills, and also of course to build the insurance. So in order for the insurance to get billed, there has to be a diagnosis or a label, and if they don't have a diagnosis or label, they can't bill the insurance. So if you kind of explain it to people like that, and I try to explain to people like that too, like don't get so bent over the diagnosis and the label, because that's not going to define who you are. You're not that. That's just a barrier that you need to overcome. And I think that that's the best way that you can frame it to someone so that they don't get scared, because some people just get scared over the idea like, there's something wrong with me. And it's like, no, there's nothing wrong with you. We just suck at communicating. I just want to learn how to communicate better. And it's kind of like a referee, because it is. It's like a referee. It's a referee that knows how to be like, oh, stop, wait, you didn't listen. You know, like they're making you practice these techniques that you're not used to doing in the home setting. We're not. Like, can you just imagine? I don't ever remember my mom, and no shade from my mom, but my mom telling me, how do you feel? Tell me how you feel. It just doesn't happen. Now I do that. Now I do that with my family member, with my kid. I try to do that as much as I can with just people that I come across that are willing to talk about how they feel. So I'm trying to break those communication barriers within my own culture and my own family dynamics, because I see it too much, and I try to tell other people too, like, hey, if other people get in conversations or arguments, please motivate your child to communicate to the person, because I'm gonna be motivating my child too, because I don't want these same patterns to keep on going, and then my son keep having the same problems where he's not communicating to a friend or his family member or his partner, whatever it is. I don't want him to not get used to like not talking about things. Like, I want them to learn how to problem solve. Like, I want to break that cycle completely. And with family therapy, it does that. It helps with communicating and just learning how to not run away, because a lot of the times we tend to avoid. That's the common thing I keep seeing over and over and over in my personal life and working as a community wellness specialist, is avoiding is a way of problem solving a lot for a lot of people, and avoiding doesn't work. And with family therapy, it's like it's forcing you to not avoid, and it's a good exposure exercise. Like, you're exposing yourself to a situation where you cannot avoid. You're gonna sit down on that couch and you ain't moving until session is over. But of course, if you need a break, you can always talk to the therapist and say, hey, when it gets a little too tensy dancy, can I, you know? But of course, you have to be mindful that you're not avoiding. Like, you have to have a plan and say, hopefully the therapist will know that your mechanism is avoiding, and we're trying to break that mechanism. So that you're not avoiding, even though you're walking away if it does get intense. Like, hopefully I would recommend for you to just give yourself like 5 or 10 minutes, then go back to, you know, continuing with the family session, so you guys can resolve certain things and move forward. I always have flies. I can never, like, I always have fucking bugs here. I think my room is out there. But anyways, I really hope that this video was useful, and I hope it motivates someone who's been thinking about doing family therapy. I hope that this was insightful and valuable for anyone who was interested in learning and wanted to see what would family therapy do, or what would you get out of it? How would that help? How would it not help? What type of professional should I look for? Should I switch it up or not? So I hope that I answered all those questions, and if you have any other questions, please comment down below. Let's conversate. Don't be shy, and if you are, it's okay, DM me and I will answer your question too on Instagram, okay? And so if you're new to my channel, please do not forget to subscribe, okay? And don't forget to poke that like button if you poke it, okay? And don't forget to share this video to someone that might, you know, be curious about family therapy, or is interested, or might want to learn a little bit more about it, you know, just like, or maybe you're trying to convince someone to do family therapy, be like, hey, just watch this video and see the things that she said and how beneficial it would be. You never know. So share this video, please do not forget to share. And thank you so much for listening and wanting to learn about family therapy, because the more people know about family therapy and the more we normalize it, the more it's gonna be common, and it's not gonna be a shameful thing. It's just gonna be like, oh yeah, you went therapy, oh cool, so did I, my family therapy, boom, 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 boom. It's gonna be a common thing. So I'll talk to you in my next video, and I will see you later. I just did the chicken dance. Oh yeah, I'm forgetting now again. Now, don't forget, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get, so you better be ready with your interventions and coping skills, all right? Family therapy is one of those interventions and coping skills, okay? And when you learn in there, you take those tools with you forever and ever. You may not need family therapy once you have it once, and if you do, it's okay. You just go back and you resolve and you move on. Use it as a tool. Don't let it use you. Bye.
I think all of us should have a hobby of some kind. If they like to play, get them a good instrument and play. You don't have to try to make a living out of it, just play.